We're now going to hear from Alison. It's a very powerful story, so I'm really keen for you to listen to her.
Firstly, I'd like to comment on how great it is to see so many people here to support Stuart and the church in advance in all the things they do. I've been coming here to participate in Empower for Women, Bible studies and Way Out Church for around 2 years now, I think. Looking back, I was broken, lost and in a lot of pain, spiritually, mentally, physically and emotionally. I had a very low opinion of God, and any faith I had in general had all but disappeared, replaced instead with an intense hatred fueled by anger and rage from the ordeals that I suffered. At the time, the only thing I wanted, if there was a God, was to give him a piece of my mind. When I first met Stuart, it's almost like he knew I was coming. He knew exactly what to say. It didn't matter how many times I danced around everything he said, he had an answer for it. In the end, I had nothing. Plus, I knew deep down I had to do something. God knows I'd given numerous men and women in similar situations the same advice when I worked as a caseworker for kids in care. I'm just glad that my situation never came to a stage of having my children removed as they had. Plus, I'm not going to lie, the offer of a work development order was a factor in agreeing to come, as I'd managed to accumulate quite a few parking fines. By now, you're all most likely at least a little curious as to how my circumstances came about. Although I have confided in Stuart and Lauren many times about it, I can still feel the hurt like it was yesterday, something I doubt I'll ever truly get over. In the year leading up to that point, I had experienced not one, but many violent attacks from my partner. I felt betrayed as I was beaten and torn apart in every way imaginable by the love of my life. A love that I had desperately wanted with all that I am. I mean, it's what we all want, isn't it? That one person who makes your soul sing and your spirit fly. Only mine came at a cost. I'm sorry. So how could I love a God who would allow this to happen to me? I was a good person. I followed the rules. I obeyed the law. I helped my fellow men and I worked hard, used my manners and so on. So why? Why me? Why did God feel that I deserved this? Had I not already suffered in life? Had I not already felt enough pain? I realise now that I truly had not. During the last violent episode, I endured 3 days of hell. Kept against my will, I endured a tirade of physical and verbal attacks. I cannot remember when there was a moment during one of those days where he stopped hitting me. My throat sore, not just from my screams and pleads for him to stop or for someone to help, but from his hands around my throat. By the second day, I was sure I was going to die. I felt the breath leave my body as his hands gripped tighter, blocking any air from getting in. I began losing consciousness. A big part of me was exhausted and ready to give up. The other part of me, so devastated at the fact my soulmate would do this to me, also wanted to give up. What's the point of trying to fight when it was obvious I was always going to lose, right? With this thought, I can recall a sudden feeling of this immense peacefulness washing over me. All the pain and terror I'd been feeling suddenly disappeared. It was truly an amazing feeling. I had not a care in the world. All the pain I felt, not a distant memory. Was I dead? I honestly don't know. Then all of a sudden, the realisation of what was happening to me came to the forefront of my mind. Images of my 4 children, all of which hold a portion of my soul, flashed in my mind, and in that moment, I've never felt as much anger in my life. Was this really how it was going to end for me? Having the one thing I ever wanted take me from this world, from my children. Suddenly, I was back in reality. My eyes struggled to focus. The air still escaping me as his hands still tight around my throat. To this day, I have no idea where it came from. but I found this massive surge of energy, and I made one last-ditch effort to fight back. And somehow it worked. His hands released and my lungs flooded with oxygen. Gasping, I sucked in as much of it as I could. As I looked up at my partner, he began to back away from me, staring at his hands. The darkness that had filled him, I could see leaving his eyes as they went from black back to normal. It was almost as though he was possessed, as that softness in his eyes that I fell for returned. Shock entering his body as he realised what he had just done. Devastated, he tried desperately to fix me up, tenderly attending to all my bruises, wincing when he came across what was quite possibly a break in a bone. Wanting and wishing with all of his might, desperate to take it all back, a plight we both knew was pointless. For though my body would heal, my soul and my heart were shattered to pieces. My body was covered in bruises. My face, especially on one side, swollen. My cheekbone fractured, and I'm told that my jaw was slightly dislodged and most likely won't ever set back in place. The hand that I used to shield my face also had many fractures. But my heart hurt the most of all. But it is not this that still haunts me, but rather what didn't happen that does. You see, he resided in accommodation over a pub in the middle of Liverpool. The pub itself I would consider to be a quite busy pub. Lots of people throughout a day, not to mention the staff. Outside, I reckon on any given day, you could see 100 people pass by day or night. In the accommodation area, there were 5 to 6 other people who also resided there, some in rooms across the hall and others with adjoining walls. Yet despite my screaming and my pleas for help, not one person came to my aid. Not one called for help, like surely someone must have heard me. If not in the pub or down on the street, at least one of his neighbours must have. It makes you question the value of your life, especially if you live in a society where your voice is unheard, or worse, heard, but not thought of enough to offer any help. If this wasn't bad enough, I then had the system fail me. The police, who failed to show up after previous incidents when I called for help, had then stuffed up when collecting evidence. Of course, their reports failed to depict this, instead stating that there was none. No doubt to ensure they are covered from being uncovered. The police prosecutor, when I tried to speak to him, said to me with a tone of utter disinterest for whatever it was I had to say, words along the line of, "With no disrespect, Miss Griffin, we have all we need from you, and your voice and opinion has no place here." Fact was, I had never felt as disrespected in any stage of my life as I did that day. For this was my story, and I wanted it to be told right. But he was right, as it didn't matter what I wanted or how I felt, because no one would give me the time to hear what I was actually saying. The degree of spiral that occurred from this, even I wasn't expecting. I lost my job. I was emotionally wrecked, and it began affecting how I worked and interacted with my manager, other co-workers and clients. Financially, this placed me into extreme hardship as my earnings went from around $1,600 a fortnight to a mere $600 a fortnight. My rent alone for 1 week could barely be covered for that, let alone everything else that needed to be paid, not to mention the fact that I still had 3 of my 4 children at home and my mother living with me. I suffered nightmares, intense nightmares, and still do, so I stopped sleeping. To keep from sleeping, I began chasing ways to keep myself awake, leading me down a road into further drug addiction. My addictions making it impossible to keep up with any bills, and money impacting on my ability to find or keep work. My family becoming increasingly frustrated. My mother, who is 60, still working practically full-time in a pub as a bar manager just to make ends meet, as she's already exhausted her super just to keep up with the bills so we don't end up on the street. I'm sure you can imagine the shame that comes from not being able to provide. My mother with a stable foundation for what should have been her retirement days So I began isolating myself from my family and my children. In my mind, I had already done enough. I didn't want them to also feel the darkness that was growing inside me. Thoughts of ending my life became a part of my daily routine. Numerous actual attempts soon followed, obviously and thankfully failing. However, the damage to my mental health took a further decline each time, intent on being stubborn by deluding myself of being strong enough to overcome this alone. I refused to seek help that I desperately needed until I came here. I often wonder if Stuart knew exactly what it was that he had just signed himself and Lauren up for when he convinced me to attend the programs. For I've never been one to keep my opinions to myself, especially if I'm passionate about it, and my hatred towards God was big. But so were my fines. Walking into Empower for the first time, I was filled with anxiety and nervousness. All these thoughts of the judgments that would come from these women I'd imagine were all devout Christians like the ones you see in the movies, walking around with their noses in the air, judging everyone but themselves, singing church hymns and hiding behind the word of God, especially the person running the show, which, for those who don't know, is an amazing woman named Lauren. On meeting Lauren for the first time, I'm embarrassed to say that it was me who passed all the judgment, and I felt at the time justified to have these thoughts, thinking how easy it was for them throughout their lives in homes with good families, never knowing really what it's like to struggle. So, of course, Lauren could sit there with her soft, caring and understanding voice, because what would she know about how hard it is to get back up when you're knocked down so many times? I laugh now because I can only imagine the look on my face at times as I sat there in shock when I realised how wrong I was. Although devout, good Christians, I can honestly say they are nothing like the type you may see depicted in movies, and Lauren truly is an amazingly sweet, kind and caring woman. I can recall during one Empower session, I took offence to something she had added to one of the worksheets. It was something to do with God, which I wanted no part of. So me and all my self-entitledness took her to task on it. Now, if it was me in Lauren's shoes, let's just say I probably wouldn't have responded even close to as kind and accepting of what I was saying. But she taught me a valuable lesson that day about how one should carry themselves when confronted with an opposing opinion. An act that, for all my communication skills that I've gained over the years, I have still never managed to master as well as her. Much to my frustration, she never met me at my level. Instead, came with a willingness to understand my point of view, not necessarily giving in to what I was saying, but wanting to find a compromise that would allow us both to stand tall in our convictions. I can honestly say that outside of my mother and my grandmother, I've never ever respected a woman more than I do Lauren now. When I left that day, I wasn't at all proud of myself, and my behaviour replayed in my head 1,000 times, not once showing me in a good light. I was embarrassed at myself and for myself. So much so that I made a point of asking Stuart to apologise. I was too ashamed and embarrassed to do it myself. Stuart told me that Lauren had this amazing understanding quality about her and that he was sure there was nothing to worry about, as she had not mentioned it to him, but agreed to pass it on regardless. Then there is Helen. Helen is absolutely lovely. Though tasked with sitting with us, if at any time something in the group upsets or triggers something, I honestly feel as though this is something that she would happily do anyway. She has this uncanny way of somehow knowing when one of us aren't having the best day. And the way in which she carries herself is enviable. She has this aura about her of genuine caring compassion that draws you in, making it easy to feel safe enough to open up, even if just a little. I still attend Empower, only now I go with the intent of paying attention. The group content is directly in line and appropriate to the areas of my life that I struggle with. It has already taught me so much about myself, and I have no doubt it still has so much more to teach me. Even if my life changes for the better, I honestly think I'd still get something of value out of it. Plus, I've made some amazing connections with some even more amazing women. each one showing me more kindness, understanding and support that anyone could ask for. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I've made some amazing friends. Friends who I will value and appreciate for the rest of my life. And then there is Stuart. Not a day goes by where he doesn't surprise me. He has managed to break down every stereotype and depiction I ever had on what a chaplain is. I have no doubt in my mind there have been many moments where he has questioned what on earth he was thinking inviting me in. As the only conduit I could find to God, he unfortunately wore the brunt of my anger. In Bible studies, I questioned and argued just about everything. There were moments where I observed him take a very deep breath. At the time, taking it in his stride, showing me patience, softness, and understanding, for he knew where it came from. He constantly met my thought process head on, and his responses forced me to question myself. I can remember at one point thinking, hey, this isn't how it's meant to go. So in defeat, I dropped all the walls and began paying attention and started taking God's word in, rather than listening solely to respond in the negative as I had been. Outside of Bible studies, Stuart has become, for me, someone I can trust with some of my deepest, darkest thoughts, offering me comforting words, prayer and support. I've said some things that, although I'm not proud of, I desperately needed to say. These are things you probably shouldn't say to a chaplain about my hatred towards God. But he stayed true to who he is, and it wasn't long before my hatred started to waver, the rage instead turning to water as I cried to Stuart. About why God had forsaken me. Thanks to Stuart, I no longer feel this way. My relationship with God, although still on uneven ground, filled with some doubt, I have given into the opportunity he has offered. Through the church, I have gained more support than I could have asked for, coming at just the right time. The loneliness I felt gradually lifted, and the groups have given me another reason to keep getting up. Stuart, who has already done so much, helped me to make a connection with a drug and alcohol counsellor to address my addictions. He continues to offer himself as an ear to bend for the things I cannot speak about with anyone else. My road to recovery is well on its way, and I again have hope for my future. Now I'm far from healed, and I still struggle to find employment. My family connections far from being repaired, and I still struggle with my addictions daily. There have been occasions when I was so close to making an attempt at my life, when out of nowhere, I'd get a message or a call from Stuart or Lauren asking how I've been, as they hadn't seen me in a while, or Stuart asking if I wanted to help out with some cleaning or a project which would be added to my WDO hours. Sometimes it was enough to stop me in my tracks. Other times, it was at just the right time for me to spill my soul to them in desperation for someone to understand how I feel. And you know what? They never failed to rise to the occasion. If not for them, the love of my children, and believe it or not, my partner, I can honestly say I would not be here today to tell you my story. And for that, I will always be extremely grateful. As a way to say thank you, I did a little painting for Stuart and Lauren. So Lauren's not here tonight, so if Helen can come up in her absence, and Stuart. The value that these guys bring to our lives, and we all come from all different walks of life. They've been here for me when nobody else has.
Let's give Alison one more big round of thank you for what she's just said.